He ruled the empire, but one missed period could ruin him, because in the palace, a belly bump could start a war. Let's talk about royal fear, not of swords or rebellion, but of the bastard, not the insult, the child, born at the wrong time, to the wrong woman, with the wrong paperwork, but all the right blood, blood that still meant power. See, emperors had many women, wives, mistresses, concubines. It was their divine right and their political insurance. But when one of them whispered the words, "I'm pregnant," the walls started listening. So did the enemies. Because a royal child didn't just belong to his father. He belonged to history, to dynasties, to war, to the jealous brother with a private army, to the exiled cousin in the north, to the queen, who wasn't the mother. Let's step into Rome. The year is 2 BC. Augustus, the first true emperor, rules with divine authority, and his daughter, Julia the Elder, is the golden symbol of virtue until she's not. She starts sleeping around, not once, not twice, a parade of lovers, politicians, poets, and soon she's pregnant. No one knows whose it is, but that didn't matter. To Augustus, it wasn't just a scandal. It was treason of the womb, a threat to the bloodline, a wild card that could break the succession plan in half. So he exiles her, his own daughter, and never speaks her name again. That's the game. You can be royal, you can be loved, but you cannot be unpredictably fertile. Not in the empire. Fast forward to the Ottoman harem. Imagine this, a favorite concubine, barely 16, pregnant with the Sultan's child. But there's another woman, older, wiser, more powerful, also with a claim. And now she hears footsteps, not the Sultan's, but the midwives, and then the guards. Because one of those pregnancies is a liability, and one is the future. Which do you think survives? In every royal court, a pregnant mistress was a loaded gun, even if the emperor loved her, especially if he did, because love made him weak, and her womb made her dangerous. One whisper, she's carrying the emperor's son, could mobilize allies, topple queens, and rewrite inheritance scrolls. Sometimes she was poisoned, sometimes it was a fall. Sometimes the baby never came out crying. That's what emperors feared, not the armies outside the gates, but the soft-bellied woman in their bed. Because she didn't ask for power. She didn't steal the crown. She just carried it under her ribs and smiled. The emperor's dying. No air in sight. The court waits. The vultures circle. But then she lays a hand on her belly, and the game changes, because a queen who says she's pregnant buys silence and a throne. Let's talk about the royal lie, the most sacred deception of all. I am with child. Because once that lie leaves her mouth, you can't remove her. You can't marry her off. You can't crown someone else. You have to wait. Wait 9 months for what might be an heir. Or just a stomach full of apples. Case study? Mary I of England, daughter of Henry VIII, queen, Catholic, desperate for an heir. In 1554, she tells her court she's pregnant. Her stomach swells. The palace is redecorated. Gifts pour in. Foreign monarchs send congratulations. And the Protestant factions freeze. Why? Because a baby means a future. And if Mary has a Catholic son, the Protestant cause dies in its crib. So they wait and wait and wait. But there's no crying from the royal chambers. No air. Just silence. Because Mary wasn't pregnant. Maybe she thought she was. Maybe it was illness. Maybe it was strategy. But it worked. It gave her time. It stalled her enemies. It held the crown steady, just a little longer. Fake pregnancies weren't always born from desperation. Sometimes they were weapons. In Byzantium, royal women would carry heirs as long as it took to shift the power. An empress might claim she was pregnant after her husband's death, just to block his brother from taking the throne. You can't crown a new emperor if one might already be growing in the womb. So the court waits, the brother rages, and she stays in the palace, protected by law. 9 months, 12, sometimes longer. Faking a pregnancy meant you held the keys to succession, but it also meant walking on a tightrope because the lie had a deadline. And when the baby didn't come, the knives usually did. In China, some imperial concubines would fake pregnancies by stuffing cloth under their robes. Midwives were bribed, officials were misled, and in some rare cases, actual babies were smuggled into the palace and claimed as their own. Why? Because motherhood meant status. A son meant immortality. It meant your name was carved in jade. It meant your enemies bowed. It meant you stopped being disposable. But the game had rules, and the punishment for breaking them? Burial alive, public disgrace, poisoned tea, or worse, being remembered as a fraud, a liar, a woman who used her womb like a weapon and still lost the war. The queen's last trick was never just about the child. It was about the idea of one, because in a royal court, you don't need to give birth to control the future. You just need them to believe you might. The empire looks strong, steel walls, gold crowns, loyal sons, but all it takes is one womb from the outside, one unfamiliar woman, one unexpected pregnancy, and suddenly your bloodline isn't yours anymore. Emperors obsessed over blood. The thicker it was, the more dangerous it became. Royal blood was sacred, pure, untouchable, until it wasn't. Because a baby born with half foreign blood could unite kingdoms or tear them both down. Let's talk about the Habsburgs. They married cousins, nieces, even uncles' daughters. Why? Because outsiders were threats. A Spanish Habsburg marrying a French noblewoman? Risky. Her womb might carry different politics, different loyalties, different ambitions, whispered by foreign advisors. So they kept it in the family, literally, even if the children came out wrong. The fear wasn't just political, it was spiritual. In the Ottoman Empire, a sultan's concubines came from everywhere. Poland, Circassia, Greece, Russia. Their beauty was prized, but their origins were feared. Why? Because if a foreign concubine gave birth to a son, that son could rule the empire. A child raised by a woman loyal not to Allah, but to her homeland. So the court had a solution. They watched, they measured, they isolated. Palace eunuchs tracked every bite she ate, every whisper she gave, every month that passed without bleeding. If suspicion grew and the child was unwanted, they didn't wait for proof. They ended it quietly, often with herbal teas, accidental massages, or spiritual rites gone wrong. In Europe, things got messier. A French queen with an Italian lady in waiting gets pregnant. Suddenly, the court is whispering, who's the real father? And if it's not the king, what happens next isn't a scandal, it's treason. Because if that child lives, he could someday sit on the throne, and nobody would ever know. The Chinese imperial court took it further. Wives and concubines were forbidden to interact with male servants, guards, or even male relatives. Why? Because even the rumor of a pregnancy from outside the royal line was enough to trigger purges, mass executions, midwives beheaded, babies drowned before they ever cried. Because in China, The emperor wasn't just a man, he was the son of heaven. And heaven doesn't accept mixed claims. But sometimes the trap worked in reverse. A foreign princess gets married into the empire. She's beautiful, innocent, quiet. Then suddenly, she's pregnant with a son. And now her homeland? They've got a piece of the empire, a bargaining chip, a bloodline inside the throne room. And war becomes diplomacy. This is what emperors feared. Not warlords, not famine, not even assassins. They feared the soft eyes of a woman who wasn't theirs, and the child she might be hiding. Because one baby with the wrong blood could rewrite 1,000 years of lineage. The cradle was ready, silk blankets, gold trim. The astrologers had already chosen the name, but the baby never cried. No bloodline, no heir, just silence. And behind that silence, someone smiling. In royal courts, a dead baby wasn't always a tragedy. Sometimes it was surgical, because removing an heir, especially before it was born, was the cleanest coup of all. No swords, no trial, no screams, just a sudden complication. Take Empress Xiaoxianchen of the Qing dynasty, beloved by the emperor, elegant, powerful, pregnant. Then one morning, she's gone. No warning, no explanation. The court says it was illness, but whispers leaked. She was carrying a son, a potential successor, a threat to the factions that favored a different line. And when a child threatens the future, somebody erases it before it begins. Midwives were trusted, but not naive. In many courts, midwives were paid hands of rival factions. They'd mix the wrong herbs, apply just enough pressure, pull at just the wrong moment, and still be praised for trying their best. A royal miscarriage wasn't always fate. It was an instruction, delivered in silence and paid in jewels. Let's visit Tudor England. Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII. She was pregnant with what might have been a son. The pressure was brutal. She needed to deliver a male heir to secure her position. Then came the miscarriage. Some say stress, some say divine judgment, but some historians whisper it was no accident. Anne had enemies, including the king's advisors and the king himself. And a stillbirth? Well, that made execution more convenient. 2 months later, Anne's head was in a basket. The palace didn't need blades to end a bloodline. It just needed a physician and a motive. In France, during the time of Louis XIV, it became common practice to monitor royal pregnancies hourly. Not for safety, for sabotage. Court ladies would swap wine for herbs, poison the bathwater, tweak the incense, whisper ghost stories until insomnia became miscarriage. A queen who lost her baby lost her leverage, her crown, her protection, and in some cases, her life. But not every stillbirth was plotted. Some were conveniently blamed. If a rival needed to justify a purge, all he had to do was claim she killed the heir. And just like that, the accused woman would vanish, or worse, be paraded through the streets as a murderess of a child that maybe never even existed. Because here's the truth. Royal births were rarely witnessed. Palace births were private, sealed behind veils and screens. And sometimes the entire story was made up. A baby born and buried, all in one night, with no one left to confirm it ever lived. This is a stillborn conspiracy, where bloodlines end in silence, and history forgets what was never allowed to begin. Because in the hands of a midwife, a future emperor could become just another royal secret beneath the floorboards. The kingdom was burning, loyalists fleeing, guards defecting, heads rolling. But in the back room of a monastery, beneath candlelight and prayer. A woman clutches her belly because inside her, the war isn't over. Not yet. Throughout history, pregnant women became vaults, carriers of royal DNA, unborn titles, potential regime resets. You couldn't kill them. Not right away, because what they carried might be the next king or the final nail in your coffin. Let's go to ancient Egypt. After Julius Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra knew her own days were numbered, but she had an ace in her womb, Caesarion, the son of Caesar. Her baby was living proof of her closeness to Rome, a claim wrapped in flesh. She paraded him, called him the rightful heir, aligned his name with godhood, because the second she lost power, he became the excuse for Rome to come knocking. And that's exactly what happened. After her death, Caesarion was hunted, not for anything he did, but for who he might become. He was the heir you couldn't let grow up, so Octavian, later Augustus, had him quietly killed. No trial, no charges, just erasure. Because when it comes to imperial survival, babies don't get mercy, they get removed. But sometimes the opposite happened. Sometimes pregnant royals were smuggled out, hidden in cloisters, moved between allies, guarded like sacred artifacts, because if they lived long enough to give birth, a comeback was possible. During the Wars of the Roses in England, Elizabeth Woodville, Queen to Edward IV, hid in Westminster Abbey while pregnant. Why? Because her husband was overthrown. His enemies wanted the bloodline gone, but with sanctuary laws and holy ground, they couldn't touch her. Not legally, not without setting fire to every fragile alliance in the country. So she waited and gave birth to a prince, one more royal chess piece. And when power shifted again, that baby became a bargaining chip. In Korea's Joseon dynasty, if a royal concubine got pregnant during court instability, she was often moved secretly to remote estates. Why? Because any child born during chaos could later be used to challenge the new ruler. So they buried her in silk, locked her behind guards, and prayed she didn't die before the crown settled. But here's the twist. You couldn't publicly harm these women. It looked bad. It raised suspicion. So enemies found subtler ways. Delay the midwives, feed her spoiled rice, arrange accidental illness. But if the child did survive, it became living prophecy. The rightful heir, the lost prince, the blood reborn. And sometimes, decades later, they came back with armies. That's what emperors feared most. The baby they missed. The one that got away. Because you can kill a king. You can poison a queen. But if you leave a pregnant woman breathing, you might wake up 20 years later with her son at your gates and your dynasty about to be erased.